Hello, friends and fellow lovers of all things beachy. Welcome to The Beach Speaks. I'm your host and beach lover Paige Friend, sharing conversations and stories to help you reconnect with the beach, return to your soul, and reimagine your life. Whether they're an entrepreneur, a conscious creator, or just someone who loves the beach, all my guests have a story to tell about what makes the beach the place to be. So grab a cool drink, sit back in your beach chair, stick your toes in the sand, and enjoy this episode of The Beach Speaks. Hey, beach lover. This episode is a continuation of the theme Close Encounters of the Marine Kind from episode 56 that I recorded with my friends John and Jennifer. And for this one, I thought I'd start out telling one or two of my own stories while scuba diving with my family. And I was certain that recalling these events would be like an easy drift dive in the crystal clear waters of a Florida spring. However, as I sat down to take my notes, I felt more like I was doggie paddling in the murky water of my memories. I could recall the events, but the details, not so much. I thought it might be helpful and maybe a little more entertaining if I invited my daughter Baylee and son Austin to join in on the conversation and tell their encounters of the marine kind. And side note, even though most of our stories are scuba diving related, it's certainly not the only way to interact with marine life. It could be on a boat, fishing, or even just standing on the beach looking out at the ocean. I remember one of our first dives as a family years ago in the Florida Keys. Austin, his dad, and I were happily swimming deep underwater in full scuba gear, circling a tall underwater statue called Christ of the Abyss. This 9-foot-tall underwater statue is an identical replica of a statue located in the Mediterranean Sea off of Italy. It's about 25 feet underwater off a reef in Key Largo and one of the most famous scuba diving sites in the world. The statue depicts Christ in a pose offering peace. His hands and his head are raised toward the surface, and you can see some of it if you're snorkeling around, but to really get the full experience, most people choose to dive. Baylee wasn't old enough to scuba yet, so she had to do a hookah dive, or a snuba dive, I'm not really sure what it's called, where she was essentially hooked up to a line that keeps you tethered to the boat. And she can swim around underwater, but just not as far down as we were. And I remember everyone having fun. However, to hear Baylee tell the story, I might have missed the mark. It's interesting what parts really stick out in my mind, and maybe what I didn't think was all that important was really important to someone else. And then there are the parts I just flat out forgot. Anyway, I think you'll really enjoy the stories and maybe have a laugh or two. And you'll want to listen to the end when I sit down with my soulmate Ernie to tell us about a once-in-a-lifetime marine encounter while aboard an aircraft carrier. I called Baylee, who's currently living in Germany, to see if she remembered any of the stories of her marine adventures. And then after that, I called Austin, who lives in Tennessee right now, to hear what he remembered of our diving together. Hey, Baylee.
Hello.
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much. I'm just chilling in my living room watching some Netflix.
All right. Well, hey, I have been recording a podcast episode about my close encounters of the marine kind. And I was talking to John and Jennifer last time about their scuba adventures, and it made me think about that time that we went diving down in the Keys. And you were really young. I think maybe you were in like first grade or something. And do you remember that?
I wasn't scuba diving, right? I was doing the hookah diving,
Right, right. Which
right?
was like semi scuba diving, wouldn't you say? I mean, you were under the water.
Yeah, I was under the water, and I had the regulator, like the same mouthpiece that you would have normally, but I didn't have the oxygen tanks. I didn't have any like of the I don't remember having any weights or any of the whatever the vest thing is called. I don't even remember anymore. It's been so long. But it was nice to be able to breathe underwater. Like that was cool. But I didn't get to go down deep and see all of the fun stuff that you guys were seeing. So that was kind of a bummer, but the feeling of breathing underwater was definitely interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I didn't know that you didn't see much. I guess we were kind of
Yeah, because I
deep
mean
down.
the oxygen that I was breathing, I was tethered to the boat. So I could only go as far as the tube would extend, which wasn't more than I don't know, maybe like 10 meters or so.
Okay.
Um, so I kind of just got to go around the boat but the water was pretty deep. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, did it make you even more interested in getting your scuba certification, or were you like, this is fun, but not
oh
my
yeah, no,
thing?
it definitely sparked an interest, if anything, just because I wanted to see the stuff that you guys got to see and that I didn't
Yeah.
get. But
Okay. So do you remember then when you got your certification? Do you remember going up to Crystal River and doing that?
yes, I do
Yeah.
remember when I got my certification. I remember the first thing, and I was thinking about this the other day actually. The first thing that I remember about getting my certification was I really procrastinated on the written portion of it because you have to do all the dive tables and stuff. And so we were in the car on the way to Crystal River where I was going to take the class and I was doing everything in the car. And that's when I found out that I get car sick if I read in the car. I was like
Oh,
super ill, but got it done, got there. And I was definitely the youngest person in the class because you have to be 10 years old in order to get scuba certified. And I was 10 years old. So
yeah. You had just turned 10.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I dove with you then. We
Yeah. I remember when it's kind of hard because I've really only gone a handful of times, I think, in total. Um, but I remember like the first dive that we did for the certification, the water was really shallow and I think everybody was still trying to figure out where their body was underwater and everything. And I remember we kicked up a lot of dirt and the visibility was kind of ruined immediately. Uh, but then there was another time, and I don't know if it was that same trip where we saw a barracuda. Was that with you?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That was scary.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, we're just swimming along, and then I mean, you were my dive buddy, but I remember Dad was trying to do all of the little hand motion things. This means fish, and this means swim that way, and so I knew the really simple ones, but I think I remember him trying to sign something to me that I just did not know. And then you kind of just, pointed over there and maybe like 3 meters away or 3 or 5 meters away was this just really big fish that I had it looked very intimidating. So kind of a
Yeah.
fun moment.
Yeah, I think it was good. I think that your dad saw it and was doing the motions because I couldn't remember what the sign was either. So I'm kind of like looking at him and looking at you like, what do
Yeah.
we do? Well, you've been diving a couple of times, right, since then?
Yeah, we did a few spring dives and I remember one of them was really, really cool. I had to have been in Florida because I feel like that's the only place that I've ever dove. But so you go into the spring and, it was kind of a cave sort of situation. And there was a hexagon made out of plastic. And it was big enough for 3 or 4 people to all kind of poke their heads in at the same time. And it was full of air. So we were under the water swimming around and seeing all of our things and whatever. And then we popped up into this little air pocket and we were, talking about what we were looking at and all kinds of stuff, which was really interesting experience.
That was surprising. Did your dive master tell you that was what you were doing, or did you just say, hey, stick your head up here?
I don't think it was with a dive master per se. I just remember it being with Dad and Austin, and I don't know. It was really cool. And I think that was one of the kind of staples of that dive was that it had this little air pocket. So they knew that was going to be there. But I don't know. It's funny because when I think back to the times that we went diving, I don't remember so much what we saw, but I can remember I would always, this is kind of weird, but when you're under the water, the only thing that you can really hear is the sound of you breathing, right? And so when you're breathing, to me, I would kind of make a little song out of it, I guess, because, you hear your breath and hopefully it's pretty steady and it kind of creates like a rhythm of sorts, I guess. And to me, it sounded different each dive. So it was kind of like, okay, well, if you did 2 in one day, that was that first dive's song and then the second dive's song. They just sound different.
Do you remember the song?
No, it's not like, it's not something you put to words necessarily. It's just the sound of the almost, I guess, like Darth Vader, like sound of the breathing in.
I knew you were going to say that because that's exactly how I was describing it to John and Jennifer. The moment I got in the water and heard myself breathing, I thought, I sound like Darth Vader.
Yeah. And I mean, it kind of forces you to really focus on your breath and everything, obviously. But I don't know. I just remember the inhale and you can hear all of the mechanical bits of it, but it's just your breath. And that's the only thing that you can hear. So it would kind of whistle a little bit, I guess, depending on the depth of the water. And
were you ever scared?
Yeah, well, there actually was one time, and it might have been a dive on the same day that we saw the barracuda, but Dad was my dive buddy. There was a time where the regulator popped out of my mouth and and you have the two, right? You have like the regulator and then the octopus, and didn't remember how to, swoop your arm around and get the hose back. And of course it popped out of my mouth on an exhale. So I'm freaking out because I don't have any air and I'm, small. So I immediately, I couldn't get it back. So I start filling up my vest and I shoot to the top of the water and the whole time I'm like, it was almost like, it felt like I was drowning. And Dad describes it like, he was like, yeah, I turned around and you were there. And then I turned around to look at something or go the next way. And then I turned around and you were just gone.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And then you grab a big gulp of air and then what happened?
I think that the dive was over at that point.
You were done.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't, I don't know. I don't remember if it was, I was done or if it was, we can't go back down because I might get the bends or something. Or it was far enough into the dive where going back down would be a waste of oxygen or something. So that was pretty scary.
You'd been on some cruises. Did you dive when you went?
Yes. We went on a cruise to Mexico and we did dive in Cozumel. And I remember that one a little bit better than some of the other ones because it was in an area where the current was really strong. And so they were saying, don't kick your legs because the current will take you along. And if you kick your legs, you're going to kick up all of the silt and everything, all of the sand. And there's a lot to see. There was a lot of coral and stuff. And so we're kind of just drifting along with the current. And there were all kinds of corals. And I don't remember if we saw that many fish. If they were, they weren't that big. But we're just kind of drifting along and, chilling, seeing what there was to see. The water was so clear. That was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, what were you thinking? Were you thinking, I'm in a whole other world?
Yeah, the otherworldly feeling is definitely something that comes to mind. And then I remember when you come up and it's over, you're sad. You're like, I don't get to go back to that anytime soon, at least, because you got to wait it out or whatever. One of the other things that I remember is I never got to do any super deep dives, but looking up and seeing the surface of the water from underneath and how surreal that was, because you're breathing underwater and, you're seeing the waves come over you. And I think one of the dives that we did, apparently the water was kind of choppy, but you couldn't really feel that underneath the water. But then when you would look up, you could see the ripples and everything. And it was really cool. Very, very surreal.
Yeah, I haven't been diving in the coral and all of that, except when we were in Costa Rica and we were on it was like a dinner cruise and sunset thing, but we went out and came into a small cove and the captain said, here's some snorkels and fins, and if you swim around these rocks and things, you'll see some fish and this and that. So we thought, okay, well, we're going to do that. And everybody else was like, let's go to the beach and swim. They wanted to paddle around with the noodles and stuff like that. And we're like, we're going to go see something. And wow, I mean, it was just so surprising. I can't remember what kind of fish it was, but it was like you were just there with them and they were just swimming all around you, that they didn't even seem to care that you were there, and I just remember that being really cool. And we did see some coral and all of that, but I haven't seen any bright fish in the coral, the things that you think about when you're diving in the Caribbean. And that's what John and Jennifer were talking about. They really like Cozumel. That was one of their places that they like to go.
Yeah. I would love to go back to Cozumel. I would love to find some other dives, but I always when I first started diving, I guess even before that, I really wanted to go see the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And it's really been really hard to hear about all the coral bleaching and everything. And I did read somewhere not super long ago that some corals are bouncing back a little bit from that. But that is something that's really disheartening to hear. And so it just makes you want to protect that, because I want to be able to go back and experience that again, or experience that for the first time in Australia and everything. So that one hits a little bit closer to home in terms of climate change and everything.
Yeah. Do you remember the manatees?
Yeah, I remember the manatees. I have vague memories of being with the manatees at one point in one way or another. I didn't think it was just in the water. I don't know. It's just funny because all the time that I got to spend in Florida, really in those sorts of areas where I could dive and have those experiences and stuff, was when I was young, So definitely be cool to see it as an adult and actually be able to hold on to those memories and everything. And obviously, we don't have any water really out here. It actually just stopped snowing too. So even if we did, I wouldn't want to be diving in it because it'd be freezing.
Are you near any lakes or?
There's a lake out here. It's not in Germany. I don't remember for sure what country it's in. It might be Switzerland, but it's at the base of the Alps. And in the summertime, when all of the ice melts from the mountains, it goes and it fills up this valley and it's a lake. But in the wintertime, when I guess the water evaporates and snows and it goes back up to the mountains or whatever, however weather works, it's just a park. And so, I mean, there are pictures of it on the internet and everything. And it used to be they would let you could go diving in it, but it was super, super cold glacier cold water because it was in the mountains and everything. But it was crystal clear, and you're diving in a park basically. So there's like the trees, and there's this one picture that I remember seeing of a diver, and they're swimming right past a park bench that's underwater. So I always wanted to do that, but I looked into it I think earlier this year actually, and they don't let people dive in it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for hopping on the podcast and chatting with me.
Yeah.
All right, love you lots, and we'll chat later.
All right, love you.
Bye. Hey, Austin.
Hi.
Hey. Well, listen, I'm calling because I am doing an episode called Close Encounters of the Marine Kind, Part 2, because I thought I'd have some stories to tell, and then I started thinking, and my memory is not all that great, so I thought, I'm going to call you and see if you remember some of these things. And if you don't, that's okay, and then maybe you've got something you'd want to share.
Oh shoot, I'll do my best. I've actually at this point I've already listened to part one, so I'm very inspired by the tales of the sea photography, and it was actually bringing back a lot of memories of having my own junior certification, only being able to go down to a certain depth, but all those memories of an underwater world kind of coming back. It's a great listen for your listeners who haven't listened to part one yet. Please do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, John and Jennifer are so much fun, and this would have been a good time for a video where everybody could see their underwater adventures, because they have so many great shots of them swimming with those giant grouper, and I mean,
yeah, it's so wild. That's crazy.
It is. It really is. Yeah, so I put links in the show notes for that episode. If you're listening, you can go back and check out their Facebook page and see all that fabulous photography. But today, I wanted to ask you, you were talking about getting certified and you could only go down to a certain depth. And I was asking Baylee, I said, do you remember when you were in first grade and we were diving in the Keys? And she's like, well, all I remember is all of you were down there having fun, and I just could only swim at the surface. So it wasn't all that spectacular.
Yeah, I recall her being quite upset about that. And the snuba, or the whatever, they call it, that was the best compromise, I guess, in that situation.
Yeah, the hookah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I remember getting certified up at Crystal River, and then you had to wait until you were what, 10, 11, something like that?
Something like that. I got certified pretty much as soon as I could, also in Crystal River, I believe. I remember going to the dive shop, and I think they had like a yearly sale when all the wetsuits and everything were on clearance, and picking up, my first, like, I think we all had wetsuits and we rented the other equipment, but yeah, that was like the big first purchase.
Yeah, I know. What do you remember from that first dive?
I guess of the memories that I've been able to conjure up, the first one I think was from my certification class. I think we were in the river at that point, in a shallow part of the river, just off of a dock. Super cold water, or at least I felt like it was very, very cold. And you kind of just like sit in a circle and you take turns, doing your little hand signals. Hand signals are huge in scuba because obviously, unless you have some very sophisticated equipment, you can't really talk to each other. And you would take your regulator out and you'd like blow some bubbles out of your mouth and then practice putting your regulator back in, clearing it and breathing normally. And then I think part of that experience, it maybe wasn't the same day I'm thinking of, but it was scuba diving with the manatees. And that was, I mean, anything with the manatees is really cool because they're just these larger than life, they're sea cows. They're big, giant mammalian creatures minding their own business, and you come into their territory, but they're beautiful, and I really enjoyed that. And I remember, I was talking about the cold water. I had these neoprene gloves on in the boat when we were going out there, And the dive instructor was like, those look nice for keeping your hands warm, but you're not going to be able to feel the manatee when you go up and pet them. And I was like, well, you get to pet them? What? So the gloves came off, obviously, and I got to pet a manatee, and that was very, very cool.
Yeah, I remember that too. I don't know that we were actually supposed to do that.
Yeah, now that you mention it, maybe not.
No, but that's okay. We were very gentle, and we weren't invading their space really. And we were told, as I recall, not to like swim up and disturb them.
You have to approach them a certain way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they were just they're so sweet. And I remember one just rolling over on its back and just kind of wanted you to rub its belly, and being so sad because you saw all of those scars, those gashes that they would have from running into the propellers.
Well, propellers running into them, right?
Well, yeah. And I just felt so sad for them in that regard. But yeah, they're really sweet. Well, do you remember when we went diving and there was this, I was asking Baylee, she didn't remember doing this, but there was like a cave sort of thing. And then there was a hole. It was like a tube and you can swim through it. And then all of a sudden it shot you out into the river. Do you remember that? Maybe this was just an experience I had that nobody else had.
So what I thought you were going to say was you dive down to a certain depth, and then there was one spot, I think it was Devil's Den maybe, that has the air bubble like dome thing where you can kind of pop up and hang out. You can take your regulator out and breathe the air they have pumping through. I do not recall a tube.
Well, it wasn't really a tube. It just seemed like there was a flow that,
like a passage.
Yeah, and then there was an opening, and the force of the spring just like pushed you out into the spring wherever we were. And I just remember that being really fun. And I thought you were there.
Shoot, I don't remember that either. I probably was, but I don't remember.
I don't know. We did a lot of diving there, but Baylee was telling me about the Devil's Den dive, and it's so interesting that you mentioned it as well. Tell me like how you remember it.
So I thought it was super cool because, well, first of all, you don't have to take a boat to get there. It's almost like you're going to the park for a picnic and you're just bringing a little extra stuff. You show up to this, in my mind, it's so idyllic. It's like this clearing with this very foresty kind of area in the middle, and you walk into that forest area, and there's a wooden walkway that takes you all the way down to where the water starts in the spring. It's very like secluded, almost magical in a sense. And you get all your stuff together on the dock and you go down. I don't remember a ton of the specifics of the hole, the spring itself. I think that was the spot that had the dome that it pumped air into and you can go under. But just remember just being surprised that you could scuba dive inland, that it was even, a possibility, and you got to see cool underwater
it's like
caverns.
You're hiking through the woods, under the canopy of these beautiful trees. Then you just happen upon it looks like this little pond or something that you just jump into, and there you are.
Exactly. Yeah. And the point about not taking the boat, I do suffer a little bit from motion sickness. I do recall dive trips where getting out to the dive site, I was not feeling very good just because, the boat and the wake and stuff like that can throw me occasionally. Once you're out there in the water, that stuff usually goes away, but it's just going out there and coming back. But for the spring dives, like I said, it's like, if you're just driving out to the local park, is a very unique experience on its own.
Okay, I know that's not the only place that you've gone diving. I think you've been diving we went in the Keys. Tell me what you remember of that.
So where was the blue hole? Was the blue hole in the Keys, or was that
Well, we
in?
were diving Christ of the Abyss. That's the one I remember. I know you've been on other dives without me, so
Now that you mentioned Christ of the Abyss, I think I remember that, at least the statue part, 'cause that's, kind of what you go there to see. I also went on a dive trip with Dad and one of his friends, and his friend was talking about how we were going to go out and try to spear gun a barracuda, which I was like, wait, what are you talking about? What are we going to do? We get out there, we get into the water. He like has the spear gun and everything, and I think he was like, when you get down there, just try to shoot it, just try to just see how it feels. And it kicked against my shoulder so hard when I shot it. I didn't want to shoot it again for the rest of the trip. Like, even if we saw something, it was probably not going to happen for me.
the kickback.
I loaded it up. I had it against my shoulder, probably not close enough, or in the water it's a little bit different. And it just like it bruised me right on the shoulder. I was like, I'm probably not going to do that again. But I think we might have seen a barracuda on that trip, and in addition to all the other fish that you see swimming around typically.
Ooh. I think I'd rather swim with sharks than a barracuda. For some reason, they just seem like really that they would come and attack you right away. I just imagine they just like coming right after you.
Yeah, I hope they're not aggressive. I feel like it's one of those situations where hopefully they're more afraid of us than we are of them. But I wasn't going to press my luck. I wasn't going to get any closer than we were for sure.
Yeah. So have you been diving in the Caribbean? I know you've gone on some cruises and you've...
I'm pretty sure the last... after this, I'll have to look up the Blue Hole or the Blue Grotto, because I'm pretty sure one of those was in the ocean, I think in the Caribbean. When we did our last cruise, we did a wreck dive. I think that's the only wreck dive that I've done before. And I mean, those are really cool because you get such a variety of wildlife down there. Like you see eels, you see turtles, you see sharks, you see plenty of sharks, small sharks, nurse sharks primarily. And then getting to go into the wreck is pretty cool.
Yeah, tell me about that.
I guess there are spots where they've designated where you're supposed to go in and out. Those spots are still kind of difficult to navigate sometimes. I actually scraped the back of my calf on like the window of the ship hole as I was going out, I think. I still have the scar, and thankfully like it didn't get infected or anything. That's one of the most memorable things I have from that trip, besides like all the animals and stuff that I saw. But yeah, going into a wreck is cool. It's almost like a cavern dive, but you're not totally. It's a little more sensory because you don't have the lack of light and everything. Like you don't have to. You bring your own flashlights and everything, but as a sensory experience, it's very cool. And then all the life that evolves around the wreck. Like I think there was a lot of good-looking coral in that area. The fish, as I said before. And yeah, you see something kind of rare, like an eel, kind of just protruding out from a rock or a space between two rocks, and you try to get everyone's attention as best you can. You tap your tank, make a little click click sound, and hopefully everyone notices. And yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the community of that. And I don't want to get ahead of the topic or anything, but diving as a community, I feel like the people who are into it are really, really into it, and they want the people that they're with to have a good time too and experience the things, through their eyes, but then you also have your own unique experience just being able to be down there. Otherwise you could just watch a video, right? You could just have someone else go and then do it for you almost. But yeah, being down there yourself is a real treat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the Titanic, and it was something of a marvel that they had gone diving to find this wreck and be able to film it, and all of the mystery around it. And then they finally got cameras that could go deep enough and around it, and we were all watching it on video and thinking,
yeah,
this is amazing, because you hear the story and then you see the actual deck of the ship, and just imagining all the...
Right, yeah, the grand staircase and all that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, all that kind of stuff. And then you're thinking, wow, this is right there. And I'm looking at it. What kind of shipwreck was it?
It was one of those the ones that they like sink on purpose, basically, to kind of establish a new, maybe not ecosystem, but a new environment for life to kind of have a new home. And it's kind of interesting, actually. I know nothing about it, but the fact that they can um, these man-made projects to essentially create a new fish suburb, new, bringing new homes and new life to certain parts of the ocean is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to have to seek out somebody that knows more about those, or maybe, is part of that experience of.
That would be a very cool guest. Yeah, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd also like to talk to somebody who does that, like treasure hunting off the coast. So if anyone listening out there knows anybody that does that, send them my way. I think that would be an interesting story. There was something you were talking about that reminded me. I'm going to have to look up that Blue Grotto thing, because now we talk about it, I think that was what we saw in Capri. I think that was the Blue Grotto.
Oh yeah, on the boat ride around the island. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't dive, but what do you remember of that? I just remember that the blue of that water being amazing.
Yeah, and I think at one point there was a rock formation where it kind of created, it was a tunnel, like, and half of the tunnel was kind of above water, and there was a lot of ocean life that had collected there, just at that natural mouth of that tunnel. And yeah, so you go through like these really cool rock formations, and as you said, the water is just like the craziest shade of blue you've ever seen. You're going around the island, and there's just so much, just the nature of it all. Never really seen anything like it before.
Yeah. Did you ever have an experience like John and Jennifer were talking about when she was shooting lionfish, and all of a sudden sharks appeared nowhere? Did you ever have an experience like that?
Sharks have definitely kind of come out of nowhere, not because there was blood in the water or anything, but you kind of get close to a certain rock formation, or like when I was getting close to the wreck, that's the closest to one of those animals that I've been. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything any more exotic than that. I don't think I've been able to see like an octopus or a squid or anything like that. That would be really cool. I think I've seen a handful of turtles.
Yeah, I'd like to go swimming with the turtles. That would be amazing. And we've gone out just kayaking in the ocean, and the dolphins will come out, and I just love, because they are just not afraid of you or anything.
Yeah.
They're just there, and quite often it's been that they notice that you're kind of paddling around, and they're like, "Hey, let's paddle around together." So they just kind of up and down
so
around.
Cool. Yeah, it's this other environment, this other living creature that you're getting to interact with, and non-verbally too, which makes it kind of special too. Like, you're recognizing that they recognize you, and that's really special.
Yeah. I can't really think of anything else I wanted to ask you. Is anything that kind of jogged your memory that you wanted to share?
I just remember on one of the dive trips, I think it was on a cruise, not the last cruise we went on, just trying to blow bubble rings in the water. Like, you take your regulator out and put your head up, and then you try to see who could blow the most perfect little bubble ring that would float to the surface.
Speaking of blowing bubble rings and all that, Baylee was talking about how she knocked her regulator out and panicked because she couldn't figure out how to swoop her arm around.
Do the arm sweep, yeah.
Yeah, and bring her secondary. And so she just like shot up to the surface, which you're not really supposed to do when you're diving.
Right.
Did you ever have an experience like that?
So I'm very, very conscientious about my oxygen levels when I am diving. I'm very conscientious about the slow, controlled breathing, at least while I'm thinking about it, because I want to be able to be down there as long as I can. and I'm constantly checking my tank pressure and all that stuff. And I think it was probably on one of the first open water dives that I did. You do that controlled ascent like you were talking about. You find your dive marker, there's a rope attached under it, and you kind of climb that rope with your partners slowly in order to your lungs to adjust. And I think we were halfway up the rope, and I was down to my last 200 or 300 psi in my tank, which anything under 500 is considered like low air. And I was getting nervous, and whoever was next to me on the rope, I couldn't really get his attention. So instead of just waiting there, I basically shot the rest of the way up. I almost pulled, a very similar thing. And only afterwards did I realize that might have been a little bit dangerous for my lungs. Like, thankfully they didn't, overexpand or anything. I didn't have any chest pain or whatever, but there is a little bit of stress when you start off where you're constantly worried about, like, oh gosh, I hope I don't just randomly like run out of air down here, because there is a kind of a claustrophobic effect in a way that you don't think about until you look down at your PSI meter, because you're being captivated by everything around you.
You're looking around you at all the beauty, and then you look up at the surface of the water and you think, I am really far down here. And
yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but with experience, that feeling, it never totally goes away, but you get used to that feeling.
Yeah. Baylee and I were talking about our first experience breathing underwater like that, and how it seemed to me sounded like Darth Vader, how you were just breathing in and out.
I do my best to imitate Darth Vader when I'm doing that, because I feel like it makes me think about my breathing, and then that way I'm not, sucking down air too fast.
That's kind of how I saw it, and that just helped me relax, just that rhythmic in and out. And yeah, because if you get nervous or you just get excited about what you're doing, I had a problem regulating my oxygen at first, because I just was so enamored with everything else we were doing. I just wasn't really thinking, slow down your breathing,
right,
make this last.
and you don't want to be the person who's like, oh, I'm low on air when everyone else is, and it was like, oh, well, yeah, now your partner is kind of screwed for the rest of the dive. It can be challenging, especially if you have to swim from your deposit point to like another area, if there's some traversal time, and it can get tiring to hold the regulator in your mouth. Like, your jaw kind of gets tired, and then you're also kicking a lot, but there's nothing like it. Like, it's so crazy.
I know. You can't stay underwater forever like SpongeBob.
Find your own pineapple under the sea. No.
I know. Oh, Austin, thank you so much. I really appreciate you jogging my memory.
No, it was great.
Yeah. You have a beautiful day. I love you. Talk to you later.
You too. I love you, Mom. Bye.
Now that we've talked about barracuda, sharks, and manatees, here's Ernie recalling his story. Hey, Ernie. Tell us your story about being on the aircraft carrier and what you saw, because when you told me this story for the first time, it just sounded so amazing, and I wanted the listeners to hear your story.
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in the Navy. 3 of those 10 years I spent on the USS Midway, which was an aircraft carrier, and we were stationed out of Japan. So we would go all over Asia. We went to Australia. We were in the Persian Gulf War, so we were in the Middle East. So we spent a lot of time on a ship. And aircraft carriers particularly have a lot of people on them, and it's really hard to get away from people. For instance, there was different spaces on the ship where they had the berthing where people slept. And the space I was in was all the way forward. There's about 300 guys in that space, very compact. So there was no personal space there. You had a little curtain you could draw to kind of close out the rest of the world, but obviously with 300 people coming in and out all night, that really didn't do a whole lot of good. So It was hard to get any kind of personal quiet time there. And then I worked in a space repairing aircraft parts, and that was pretty compact. A lot of people there. The space that I lived in or slept in was all the way forward of the ship. And for those that aren't familiar with aircraft carriers, again, when they shoot the plane off, they shoot it with it's a big hydraulic ram, pneumatic ram, and it shoots the planes off the front of the ship. Well, the space that I slept was right underneath that. So imagine all day and all night you have an aircraft being launched from 0 to 150 miles an hour off a big ram, and the noise that makes. So when you first pull out, you don't get hardly any sleep. The space that I worked in happened to be right underneath where the planes landed. So all day when I was working, you hear these, I mean, literally 4 inches above us, these planes coming in with a tail hook trying to catch a cable, and they're coming in slamming on the deck all day. As a matter of fact, I remember one day when I was fairly fresh on the carrier, they have TVs in every space that show what's happening on the flight deck. So if there's a fire or an emergency, everybody can kind of quickly see, what's happening and assist. And I remember one day I was just happened to be glancing at the TVs for some reason, and as a plane was landing, it hit, and you could hear as it landed, it caught the cable and it was slowing down, but then you could see something shooting off of the plane, and I could hear it right above my head. Probably the space we were in was directly below the flight deck, so probably a couple feet above my head. Through about 4 inches of steel, you hear this scraping noise. I'm looking at the TV and I see something going off the side of the ship. And I asked one of the people that had been there for a while, and I said, "What was that?" And he goes, "Oh, it looks like a missile fell off the side of off the airplane when it landed and scraped across right above us." Something. Oh well, this is going to be a fun trip.
Yeah, that was fun.
So anyway, that's kind of the living conditions, and it was an older ship in fairly good shape. It was just very small and not much room. So you certainly, after being at sea for 3, 4, 5 months, you need some personal space. So one of the places I like to go is up on the flight deck, and they let you go up there when they weren't flying any airplanes. It's a very large space, and the ship was probably 1,000 feet long by a couple hundred feet wide. It's a large space, and people are working up there when they're not flying. But one of the things they would let you do is kind of just sit up there. And I always went all the way to the bow. So the bow on an aircraft carrier, on this particular one, was probably 60 to 70 feet off the water. So you can just kind of go up there and hang your feet over the front.
What? Wait a minute. You had no railing or anything like that?
No, there's no railing because they launched aircraft there. They did have
there's no place for you to hold on?
No, you can't hold on, but maybe 4 or 5 feet down there was this metal net that was like your last bit of assistance if you're going over the side. Anyway, so I'd go out there a lot of times in the morning and just throw my feet over the front and just hang out. And when we're at sea, you could see all kind of things kind of floating by. I saw lots of sharks and turtles and things I couldn't even recognize, and parts of ships, and just debris, and you can see all kind of stuff up there, especially on a really calm day. I remember probably the most memorable experience, I think, was when aircraft carriers are very large and they have a big radar signature. So they would practice these maneuvers where we were in the Philippines, and they would practice these maneuvers where they would go into these large coves behind these mountainous areas, pretending to block the radar signature from other ships or aircraft. So kind of basically trying to hide the aircraft carrier in a large cove. And I happened to be up there one morning when we were practicing. We went to this cove. It was completely still. There was hardly any wind, and there was definitely no waves. The water was flat. It was just beautiful. You could see, it was pretty deep, but you could see down pretty far. So I'm, hanging my feet over the front, just kind of sitting there. And most of the time, whenever we're moving like that, there'll be a few dolphins, here and there, kind of catching the bow wave. So when a large ship like that moves through the water, it's putting out a wave, 5 or 6 feet tall as it moves. So imagine it just completely flat, calm day, and I'm sitting there and I see a couple dolphins riding the bow waves, and a couple of more, and then a couple of more. And the next thing I know, there was thousands of dolphins. I mean, it's as far as you could see, just dolphins everywhere, just riding the bow waves, just, jumping out of the water. it was like they were really excited to see us. So I obviously my jaw dropped, and I'm just like looking at this in just amazement. And I was pretty much in the moment. And then I heard the captain, which this doesn't happen very often. And that was the only time it ever happened when I was on the ship in 3 years. I mean, the captain might come over and give reports on this and that, where we're going, when we're going to get there, that kind of thing. But in this case, it was almost a call to everyone on the ship to come out and look at what was going on. He was so amazed. He had never seen that before, that he wanted to share that with the entire ship. So anyway, I was sitting there by myself for quite a while, and all of a sudden, thousands of people start coming up and invading that little bit of private space that I had. But I was glad that they were able to see it, because that was one of the most amazing sights that I've ever seen. 1,000 dolphins just having a good time, next to a warship in the middle of, in the middle of the Philippines and some random island. So it was gorgeous, and I'm glad that I was able to see that. Unfortunately, I took a bunch of pictures, but that was back in the old film days, and the film got lost. So I don't have a record of it on film, but I certainly have one embedded in my mind, and it's something that I'll probably never have a chance to see again, but I definitely enjoyed seeing it at that time.
Yeah. I love the way you tell that story, especially at the end when you were talking about looking at the dolphins and around a military ship. I mean, what a difference, and that they were just out there having fun. I just can't imagine what it must have felt like. And you got that memory. You took the picture in your mind. And sometimes those are the best photographs we can take, right?
Yeah, I was just the right time for me to be in the right place. And I'm glad I got to see it. I mean, nature at its best.
Well, what did you think? Dolphins and an aircraft carrier? My original idea for this episode was simply to share some stories that I didn't get to share in episode 56. And then when it came to edit the recordings and listening back on the conversations, I realized it wasn't all about encounters with a barracuda or getting to pet a manatee. It was about hiking through the woods to find a cool place to dive, or swimming past a park bench in a glacier, or the awe of seeing hundreds of dolphins playing around a battleship. It's what it feels like exploring the world underwater, and the tremendous impact we humans have on our planet's most precious resource. Of course, there are many more tales to tell. And if you've been inspired by or reminded of a unique marine encounter of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Send me a voicemail or an email, and I'll share it on the show. This is as much your podcast as it is mine, and if the beach is speaking to you, I'm listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Beach Speaks. If you liked what you heard, share the podcast with another beach lover. And speaking of sharing, I want to know how the beach is speaking to you. Share your favorite beach story or why you love the beach so much. Maybe you have a beachy tip or two that you think other beach lovers might like to know. To record a message, just go to my website, thebeachspeaks.com. Click the voicemail button, it's super easy, and I'll play it on the show. And if more beach is what you crave, visit thebeachspeaks.com or follow The Beach Speaks on Facebook and Instagram, where I post all my gorgeous sunrise photos and videos. It's another way for you to reconnect with the beach, return to your soul, and reimagine your life. The beach is speaking. Are you listening?